Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start in 1 minute. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate everybody being here this morning. We're going to call the subcommittee of the Resource Management Subcommittee of the Natural Resources to order. And everybody remember Mr. Jeff Cowan, our Director of EPD, has had a hip replacement, doing well, but just keep him in your thoughts and prayers. And we'd like to ask Representative Huddleston if you'll lead us in prayer this morning.
Mr. Chairman, can I get, while you pray for my mother-in-law? She fell and broke her hip. Oh, no. They're doing surgery at 10 o'clock this morning. Going to have to put some screws in there. So, wanting a bad break, but they're going to put screws in. Remember her, Jewel Carter.
Jewel Carter?
Carter, yes.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, just thank this day, Lord. Just thank for all the great things you do, Lord. Just as we come before you today to do the state's business, but we also want to remember the ones that we need your lifting hand to lay upon. And thank you for the surgery of Jeff Cowan and knowing that he's come home to get better and to recover. And Lord, just let's lift up Representative Corbett's mother-in-law, Ms. Carter. And like I said, with the hip surgery that she has, and just, Lord, just all the unspoken prayers that we have, please lift those up, and just know that we know that you can lay your hand and do the healing. Lord, if you will, just be with us each and every day. Allow us to be your example again, and just thank you for all things you do. In the name we pray, amen.
Very good. Thank you, Representative Huddleston. Okay, this morning we are going to take up HB 351. So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to turn that right over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you a substitute to House Bill 351, LC 443100S. Yeah, we met last week and we presented a bill that we've been working on for almost 2 years now. We started last year early in the session working with all parties involved, and then introduced the bill, I think the last of the session, and read it, and that way everybody could work on it from last March until now. And so we continue to work on this, and after the meeting the other day, working with all parties involved, our director, Jeff Cowan, and all parties involved, we made a couple changes, and that's what the substitute you have before you. And basically all we did with the substitute on lines 127 through 130, we deleted those lines, and what those lines did, they required that the local government submit a copy of ordinance or resolution it hadn't adopted, identifying the official authorized to submit the zoning and solid waste management plan, consistency letters. The EPD has determined that they can look this ordinance up and the resolution or request this if necessary, and it does not need to be included in statute. And then lines 137 through 148, again, we've struck those lines as well, and in those lines, it indicated that in his or her sole discretion, the EPD director believed that the facility as described in its final design or operation plan was substantially different than the one described in the local government zoning and solid waste management consistency letters, that he or she could require the applicant to submit written reconfirmation from the local government. The EPD, I believe they have this authority already to seek this reconfirmation directly from the local government if needed, and therefore this provision does not need to be included in this statute as well. So, and they've had, they just settled one lawsuit that they won. So this, they confident they have this, authority already and don't need to put this in the legislation and statute. So that's the only changes we made, was deleted lines 127 through 130, and then 137 through 148. And that's been taken out of the substitute you have before you. So I'll stand for any questions, if there are any.
All righty, Mr. Chairman. And like you said, we did have a good subcommittee hearing. I can't remember what week it was. Last week, I guess that was.
It seems like a year ago now,
yeah,
the many meetings we had, but yes, last week.
But We did have a good meeting that day and great attendance at that subcommittee hearing. Now, let's ask committee. Now, any comments or questions to the chairman that you might have? Representative Buckner.
I'm sorry to have a question, but it was brought to my attention from somebody at home. In 152 to 158, we're in a significant recharge area, and by removing that, does that mean that now a regional landfill can be put in a significant groundwater recharge area?
Let me phone my friend and bring them up, but I don't believe that is the intent or that gives them authority to do that, but I've got an expert here.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Visser. I'm the Assistant Branch Chief for Land Protection at EPD. No. So that provision that is struck is strictly related to the special solid waste provisions that have been deemed unconstitutional. So all of the existing landfill siting requirements are all the same. It's just removing that special solid waste provision.
Thank you.
Yep.
I got it.
Thank you, Representative Buckner. Representative Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to follow up on the question I had before. I had a problem with just seeing that section, the same one that was just mentioned. I want to commend you for placing in your legislation that they have to go to the local government and look at the ordinances and so forth. But I need you to really clarify on this, that because it gives me the feeling that they can go around the local government and do a regional facility, but you're saying that this is not the intention of the legislation.
Correct. So what you're concerned about in terms of going around the local government, this legislation actually fixes an issue we had in a jurisdiction with which you may be familiar about who was able to issue the letters. So previously, this requirement that it be in conjunction with the solid waste management plan has always been there, but before, EPD did not necessarily have a way to determine who was the right person to send the letter from the local government, who was authorized to do that. So this legislation fixes that, requires that the local government designate an authorized person, or that it be the head of the elected body or the chief elected official that sends the letter. So that fixes it. And that concern about those regional facilities, again, just as Representative Buckner raised, is specific to that language that's being struck, is specific to the special solid waste, which was out-of-state waste. That was a phrase that was used to try to exclude out-of-state waste landfills, or out-of-state waste from our landfills, and that was struck by the court about several years ago, about 20 years ago.
Well, as a follow-up, I want to say again, thank you for including that language in your legislation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative Davis. Anybody else have a question or comment from the committee? I know Miss Anna had a sheet out there. I don't know if anybody signed up. Doesn't look like they did, but I'll say, does anybody have a comment they'd like to make? Okay, let's see. Number 28, who have we got down there?
One, Mr. Chair, the motion do pass.
All right, we've got a motion. Do we hear a second? Second? Okay. All right, any comment now? Now that we got a motion and a second. Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. And it so passes, Mr. Chairman. We'll send that on up to full committee. This subcommittee of the Natural Resources is no other business. We'll stand adjourned. We'll go into a full committee. I'll get all this drawn down.
Thank you.
Of course.
Good morning, everyone. I call this double jump rope. So we're doing a couple of things this morning. Again, I'm so glad that EPD Director Jeff Cowan is doing better, and we'll keep your mother-in-law in our prayers, Representative Corbett. So before the committee now is House Bill 351, right? All right, and it is. You've just heard the debate. in the subcommittee, but now is the proper time for any discussion or questions on House Bill 351 by the full committee. Press your button if you have any questions. Yes, number 28.
Madam Chair, is that the appropriate time?
Yes, it is.
Make a motion to pass.
All right. Second. And have a second. So before the committee is this question. Any further comments or questions? Then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. So thank you. Have your bill. And again, just as chair, I want to comment that the questions raised on behalf of our citizens we represent are very important. This has been a change, but it's going to be a change for the better. I just want to thank all over the state, this issue has been studied and brought up, and I want to thank everybody for their comments and their input. It took a while, but we've got us a bill that we think will work and will help our citizens and our natural resources. So thank you. All right, I have comment. I can't see you. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I would just like to give a shout out to our director, Jeff Cowan. I think time he came out from under anesthesia the other day, he was calling me to talk about this. So he's been very involved in this, and I want to thank him and wish him a speedy recovery.
Thank you. So the only question I have is which landfill will he choose when the maker calls him, you know? Good morning. All right. Thank you very much. And we have a special treat this morning. We're going to hear from Mark Masters. He is the Executive Director of the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center at Albany State University. He also serves as the Outreach Director for the Center of Behavioral and Experimental Environmental Research and is nationally recognized in leading agriculture water use and policy. Mark currently chairs efforts focused on water management for the American Farm Bureau, National Association of Conservation Districts, and Interstate Council on Water. While we're doing the switch over to this presentation, for those who are just now tracking this water issue, when I was first elected back in 1996 and started serving in 1997, we were engaged in everywhere we would turn around, there was another lawsuit against the state of Georgia from our neighbors, Florida and Alabama. We were struggling with pollution coming from the major urban area, which we are in right now, and we had a lot of challenges ahead of us, and it took us several years. It wasn't in 2002, we passed the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District Act, and we started the committee to study how to do regional water planning for the whole state. And I believe that was in 2008 that we created these regions. But from that point, finally, the water was cleared up, the lawsuits subsided, and we're now in a position that we no longer look at ourselves in the whole picture as, I live in this part of Georgia, therefore I think this way. We have a shared commonality with the greater metropolitan Atlanta area and their resources, which they share with everyone. We have Mr. Masters there, who is well known. So we have created what I call almost a trio of Metro Water Planning District and the state of EPD, and then with all the regional part of the state. I see Catherine Zitch here. She's been very active in this, and then Anya with EPD. So we're in a good position, but more than anything for this committee to understand is we were whipped and beaten down and trying to manage all of this, but now this state, Georgia, and for what it's done, is a resource now for the rest of the country, because we did the difficult decisions, and you're going to hear a good story this morning. So, sir, if you'll go ahead and start, and your program is yours. Now, our committee members will be coming and going because we're at the point of the session where our bills need to pass by end of next week, and so we serve on several committees, and so our members will be coming and going. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that introduction. It's certainly a pleasure to be here this morning and share just a little bit with you. So I am Mark Masters. I'm the director of the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center. And if you are not familiar with that entity, we turned 25 this year. We got started back in 2000, actually from a grant from the Georgia Research Alliance. And we have a mission statement and all the rest of it, but I tell people we were put together to answer the so what questions. So we do a lot of research. There's been a lot of good work going on about water. But we specifically needed a group to say, okay, so what? What does that mean? How does that inform our decision making, our stakeholders, our policymakers? What do we do with that information? And so that's really what we were put together to do. I'm very passionate about this subject. The Water Policy Center is headquartered at Albany State down in southwest Georgia. Born and raised in that part of the world, still live and farm there with my family. And so our topic of agricultural water use is near and dear to me, not just professionally, but also personally. And so I do, most of my presentations are generally sort of technical and data heavy and all that. There's more pictures than data in this presentation. I want to let you all know about the good work that's been going on in rural Georgia specific to ag water use, and just make sure we all understand where we've been and where we're headed. And I think both are quite good. So I'm
this printout in our file. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to start my presentation about Georgia ag water use by going to Washington State. So it may not have shown up in color in your printout, but on the screen, there's a picture of me standing with a handful of farmers in a field in Washington State. It's the dry side. If you look at that map, everything that is green means there's water being applied to it. This is central Washington on the dry side, and they grow a lot of potatoes and corn and a couple of other things. Everything else is brown. Why? Because it is in the middle of a desert. Those farmers out there are pumping. Representative Campbell, you'll appreciate this, being from Mitchell County, where the wells are a couple hundred feet deep. That gentleman's well is 2,600 feet deep. So he's pumping water half a mile vertically to irrigate potatoes. The issue is out there is the aquifer that they're pulling from does not recharge at all. And that aquifer is steadily declining. And so in order to help keep those farmers farming, they're moving Columbia River water 105 miles in great big pipes like the one you see me standing in there in the lower part of that slide. And I give you that picture and that information to set the stage and remind us that that's not the situation we're facing. We are not in a desert. And when I go out and I give these talks about all the great stuff in ag water use in Georgia, my friends out west are kind of incredulous, like, what are you talking about? You live in Georgia. Don't you get plenty of rain? Yeah, mostly, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that helps put into perspective the scale at which we're dealing with problems related to ag water use, and I think also underscores why Georgia's in a pretty good spot moving forward. So irrigation is a big deal for us. We irrigate, and I apologize to the committee, I've got a 2024 update to this. This is through 2020. This is our irrigated acreage in the state of Georgia. Right now we're at about 1.7 million acres of actual irrigated land. Those colors represent the different crops, and obviously those ebb and flow depending on prices. But mostly peanuts, corn, cotton, some more vegetables, and pecans down where I'm from are a big deal. So that water helps us generate a high quantity of crop, but also a high quality of crop as well. If we look at our permitted withdrawals, there's 37,000 dots or so on that map. The one on the left, the blue dots are groundwater withdrawals, and the dots on the right map in green are surface water withdrawals. And we're going to hone in on kind of that southwest Georgia area where you see that high concentration of groundwater use in just a minute. But as you might expect, most of the agriculture is in terms of row crop and irrigated, is in the coastal plain, South Georgia, below the fall line, and consequently that's where most of the agriculture withdrawal permits are as well. All right, so back to my friend in Washington, staring at me like I'm crazy when I say we have ag water issues in Georgia and he's pumping water half a mile. Don't you get all this rain? Well, yeah, we do. On average, get about 50 inches of rain. So I went and I just said, let's go to the middle of the state. There's a weather station there that's been there 100 years, said, let's go back to 1950. Well, there's our average. And does anything strike you as odd about that average? You know, we get about 50 inches of rain. Problem is, it's never 50, right? It feels like, especially recently, it's either 30 or 70, right? So it's up and down, it ebbs and flows. And if we hone in on the growing season, which is, you know, what me as a farmer and all of the folks that do what I do as well, they're interested in the growing season. Well, that's not any different, right? The average during the growing season, April to October, is about 24, 25 at that particular station, and it's up and down, up and down, up and down. They say bring this home, right, to really underscore the point. This is a screenshot from, actually it's this phone because I don't like to change things. This phone's about 8 years old. Screenshot of a radar, my radar app. We raised beef cows and a few other things, and we had thinned some pine trees, and we're trying to get some pasture established under those pines. Well, it's difficult to irrigate pine trees, right? You can't run an irrigation system through there. So we had done all this work and spent a bunch of money and cleaned it up. We're getting some pasture going under there, and this was in late May of 2018. And I live and farm just south of Dawson, Georgia, which is in Terrell County. And it's a little hard to see on that map, but right there where that rain kind of stops to the south, that's right where my farm is, kind of where that road makes a little bend. So that was on June 29th. We spent a lot of money and it still hadn't rained, and I was pretty interested in getting some rain on all that seed that we had put out. So that was on June 29th. If we fast forward to July 8th, I was getting excited because it looks like we're going to get some rain. We had, you know, thunderstorms to our south, right? That was July the 8th, about a week later. And that right there will just, I mean, that is why I also am the director of the Water Policy Center, because that's the kind of luck I have. So for over a month, my farm was in a drought at a really important time. That's why we need supplemental irrigation to bridge these dry times, because the pattern of summertime weather in Georgia is there is no pattern, right? And so the last thing, just to really hammer this home, lest you think 2018 was an aberration, this was 2024, same weather station. The orange bars are what we recorded in rainfall, and the blue line is the average. So we started our growing season in pretty good shape, right? March and April were pretty good. May wasn't too bad. June, it basically didn't rain. July, it rained 8 inches. August, it basically didn't rain. September, it rained 8 inches. October, it didn't rain a drop. Now, if you're a plant, that is not a very good chart, right? Because you're not going to make a very high quantity crop, and you're certainly going to make a high quality crop with that. So irrigation matters. It's why farmers have invested north of $3 billion in irrigation infrastructure. It's why the state pays so much attention to it. All right, so we have these normal years. But a lot of what we focus on, and I think rightly so, is what do we do when it gets dry? So I started off talking about my friends out west, and we do in fact have, relatively speaking, abundant water resources, both surface and groundwater. But as everyone on this committee understands, it can get dry and it will get dry again. The map on the screen is from 2012, and if you'll remember back, that was the second year of a pretty extreme drought. 11 and 12 were really, really bad. We were in exceptional drought down in southwest Georgia. And on the right-hand side, the map there, and again, not in color in your packet, but on the screen, if it's a red dot, that's bad, right? That means that at that stream location, it's never been lower than that day, right? So we were setting record low flows in our streams down in southwest Georgia during 2011 and 2012. And so we need to be prepared, even with our abundance of water resources, to make sure we can manage properly for both the resource and the surety of our farmers with respect to their access. So when it gets dry like that, you can end up a lot of places, but two places you might end up. One is the Supreme Court of the United States. So this is a picture I took on January 8th, 2018. On a bitterly cold morning out in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, where we were, in fact, hearing arguments between Florida and Georgia. There were some folks in this room that were there as well. That this has been covered, this committee is well aware of that, but suffice it to say, as that case proceeded, much more of the focus from our friends to the south was on agricultural water use and asking for some pretty significant cutbacks in what we do in Georgia. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to help defend the state of Georgia in that, and ultimately we came up with a very good decision for Georgia, and I think it's because of all the good work that we did. So you might end up at the Supreme Court, but you might also end up in Spring Creek, just north of Colquitt, Georgia, and that's where that picture's from. That red dot, or those red dots that I showed you on the map before, that's what a red dot looks like in the stream. And no farmer, no environmentalist, no anybody will argue that that is a healthy stream, right? We saw some pretty drastically low flows during that drought. And so the idea is to make sure that we have things in place where we don't see flows like that in our creeks and rivers. But again, as I said before, also making sure that our farmers have a surety of access to the water that's so critical for their operations. So, to the good story, and this committee certainly deserves an awful lot of credit for that. I am fortunate enough to go around the country and do talks like this and sort of champion and cheerlead about why Georgia's done so much. But if we go back and the chairman talked about regional water planning coming from the state water plan, and then even some of the building blocks that were put in place before that, the story is quite tremendous, both in terms of the funding that has helped us build all this database and information to help make decisions, but more importantly, I think, engaging the actual stakeholders and the people involved at the local level to reinforce the importance of water. And so water planning has been a big deal for us now for going on 20 years. And that's helped us build the relationships necessary to develop some of these more nimble and I think dynamic ways to manage. Agricultural meters, 2003, I was talking with Representative Buckner before the meeting. He said, well, my first year was 2003. I said, oh, you got to do metering, right? Let me tell you that is one of the most significant pieces of legislation that has ever come out of the legislature. The agricultural metering bill, where we purposely went out and said we want to measure what is being used at all those dots, you remember from the first couple of slides? We're measuring the water use at those locations. That was critical to our defense in the Supreme Court, and it is critical to what we're doing now with some of these more, as I call them, nimble management practices before. So I encourage us to keep that up because it's a management tool for the farmer. It gives the farmer a state-sanctioned way of measuring and demonstrating their reasonable use. And for, water data geeks like me, it's fantastic information because we've linked it with the third panel there, actual field verified wetted acreage. So when you put known acreage with known water use, you end up with the best ag water database anywhere in the United States and arguably anywhere because we grow a lot of different things and on a lot of different soils in a lot of different ways. And we're able to not say we think our water use is X, Y, Z. We know what it is, and that is critically important. And a hat tip to our farmers. We've gone and touched. There's about 27,400 center pivots in the state of Georgia, and we've touched probably 16,000 of them. We've mapped them all, but in terms of we know how many acres they're irrigating, we know what kind of nozzles are on them, we know the conservation practices in place. And our farmers are extremely efficient at getting water from a source to a crop for beneficial use. 94% of the acreage down to where I'm from is irrigated using highly efficient irrigation systems. That's a big deal. So you roll all that together and you say, so what? Well, the so what is it lets us do things like the Georgia Flow Incentive Trust. And so I'm going to hone in and give us just a little bit on a project that I think is sort of game-changing for Southwest Georgia. Restore and protect flows in the Lower Flint Basin, both for the users and the natural systems. That's a map of the Lower Flint, Southwest Georgia. Those red in your packet, sort of the darker part of the streams, is critical habitat for endangered freshwater mussels. So remember that picture from Spring Creek where the flows are pretty low? That's critical habitat, right? And so we want to make sure that we're protecting that, again, both for the resource and our users. And so because we have this solid foundation of data and information, we can go and develop things like a habitat conservation plan. And that is an extraordinarily heavy lift that is provided for in the Endangered Species Act. And it's essentially a document that says Fish and Wildlife Service, we as a state, or we as the applicant, in our case it will be the state of Georgia, we represent that we're going to do a certain suite of management practices in exchange for a permit should there be a taking, harass, harm, of an endangered species, that there's a permit to do so. And that's what gives our users the certainty. So in this HCP that we're working on and intend to submit to the Fish and Wildlife Service very, very soon, we are putting together a suite of management practices, and we'll talk about a couple of them, in exchange for that certainty, right? So we expect more certainty for our farmers, and we expect higher flows in the creek when we need it most. There's a lot of data collection involved in that. We're putting in a brand new network of monitoring wells in the deeper aquifers. We are providing alternative sources for our surface water users in this part of Georgia. So obviously a surface water pump, it's a pipe to the creek. So when you cut it on, every gallon that thing pumps is a gallon not in the creek. Whereas groundwater, in some cases there's a connection, but it's much less. So we're actually providing, using funding from ARPA, alternative groundwater sources to make sure those farmers can keep farming and irrigating when the creek gets low. Again, lots of other management practices that we're looking at. Conservation technology, continuing to get more crop per drop, as they say. And UGA's done a lot of work on that. We're looking at easements, voluntary incentives. We are doing some augmentation in a couple of locations and looking at sedimentation control. It's a big deal in our part of the world, and not from what you think, not necessarily from agriculture, but from dirt roads. There's 2,400 dirt road stream crossings in our project area. A lot of sediment comes off those dirt roads. We're looking at that as well. And then the last bullet, which I think is awfully important, this is allowing us to do some new state permitting and policies for future withdrawals. Because as Dr. Trzynski from EPD is right to point out, farmers have experienced kind of an up and down with permitting over the last 20 years. And so we want to give them certainty for the future. And it's exciting to know that EPD is opening up applications for new Florida withdrawals down in the lower Flint starting April 1st. And that's because of all the work that's gone before it. And now we realize that we can open that up for our farmers to use going forward. That's a big deal for folks down in that part of Georgia. So what are we working on? Well, it's wells. You see one there. They were finishing out one. We are in the process of drilling those alternative source wells for our farmers. And again, happy to go into as much detail as you would like. But we've got about 160 landowner agreements with farmers that are interested in this program. We have put in, I think we're approaching 60 or 65 test holes at some of these farmers' locations, and we're in the process now of drilling production wells. And again, all under this ARPA funding that we were fortunate enough to get from the governor's office through OPB. And I also showed one of the sedimentation control areas that we worked on. That's a site in Webster County. And you can see on the top there the erosion along that dirt road, putting a lot of sediment in that critical habitat. And then you see where we were able to go in there and fix that and put some BMPs in place. Also working very closely with University of Georgia on some voluntary incentive, trying to gather information from farmers about what they would like to see in terms of perhaps tweaks to the Flint River Drought Protection Act to make it a little bit more nimble and dynamic as well. So all that work is going on. And just kind of wrapping up, I want to point out, and it's tough, the only thing I could find was a scan of a fax from a long time ago, but to underscore the importance of regional planning, kind of where I started from, That letter is a letter of recommendation from the chair of the Lower Flint Council in 2013, Richard Royal, who all of you remember his service in the legislature as well. And he's saying, hey, we think looking at alternative sources is a really good idea in Southwest Georgia. And so we were able to do a seed grant funded by EPD to go look at that. And so when the funding from ARPA was available in big numbers, we were ready. Right, that's the point, is we were ready to do it. So this was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. So it really underscores the foresight of those councils and their high priority management practices, source switching, and look at developing an HCP. That was 10 years ago when they were talking about that. And so they were ahead of the curve, and the stakeholders were saying, this is good work. Let's be able to do this. And so we were ready. And that's just a picture there of when they were wrapping up their first plan about 10 years ago. And there was a lot of folks that I'm standing on the shoulders of that are no longer with us in that picture, but that deserve an awful lot of credit for where we are. That's just a quick snapshot of our advisory board. I put that up there to underscore a couple of things. It's very, very broad and diverse in terms of stakeholder interest and location, but there's also that direct connection back to the councils. We have both the chair and vice chair of the Lower Flint and Upper Flint Water Councils as part of that. And I mentioned the submittal of the HCP. That board, in a unanimous way, approved the draft to go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at a meeting last week down in Southwest Georgia. That was a really big deal. And so a big thanks to them. Where are we headed? I don't know that one's in your packet. I keep that slide in my slide deck as a reminder. Like, sometimes all the signs are pointing one way and the roads plan to go another. I like that slide for a couple of reasons. One, it's absolutely genuine. It's been fixed since, but not before I was able to get a picture. And two, be ready. All right, be ready. I know that this committee's heard from my colleague Catherine Zitch and others about where things are going in Georgia, whether it's particularly in the metro areas. There's a lot of stuff coming at us. There are things coming at us that we were not talking about 5 years ago. Same is true in rural Georgia related to ag. But my last slide is one that it gives me the confidence that we are ready for that. That's a slide of, you see Richard Royal there in the foreground. There's many thousands of acres of irrigation represented there. Dr. Trzynski's in that picture. Former director of EPD, Judd Turner's there. Wildlife biologists, mussel experts. The point is they're all there together saying this is a big deal to make sure we get this right for the resource, the endangered species, but also for us. And so back to my silly picture with the sign, regardless of where that road goes, Georgia's in an extraordinarily good position to not react, but to respond. And the Water Policy Center has certainly been privileged to be involved in these discussions. I'm excited about the team that we have in place. Gone on a little bit longer than I wanted to, but appreciate you giving me some time this morning to help tell the story, and that's my contact information. It's in your packet. Madam Chair, would love to entertain any questions from the committee.
Yes, and this to the committee is the proper time to ask some questions. So just press your button and then say your name. Number 7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Viola Davis, District 87. First of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. And it's nothing better than to hear that we've been proactive here in Georgia. I have a number of constituents that are asking me questions about the water. I mean, we have water issues dealing with people. You have water issues dealing with agriculture. But now we have a new entity where there's water issues dealing with the industry, data centers, your automobile plants, and them wanting, 1 million to 6 million, is that gallons per day?
I believe so.
Okay. Will you be using the same equipment that you measure for agriculture on the ones dealing with these different industries, such as the data centers? I mean, are you the agency that's going to make sure that there is a balance?
I believe the answer to your question is that the agency that's responsible for that is the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, so Georgia EPD. We are a technical support arm of Georgia EPD through grants and contracts and things that we do to support them, mostly through gathering stakeholders, supporting the regional water councils. We do not have any regulatory authority. We're a university. We're a research kind of a think tank type organization. So we would not be involved in the regulatory part of that. It is certainly my understanding that very much like agriculture, and really Georgia was way out in front in metering agriculture, but our industrial and municipal withdrawals are all required to be metered as well.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes. Yeah.
So you won't be working in the industry area? There will be just the EPD doing that, or?
EPD maintains that regulatory oversight of whether it's agriculture, over permitting in terms of industry, municipalities, agriculture. So while we're not involved in that in any way in terms of the regulation, it's very likely we would be involved in some of the stakeholder discussions about water policy moving forward, which would certainly include those industries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, we might be asleep, but I do have one for you, and it goes to when you were talking about wells and the drought and then the excess of rain. All over the state, that excess rain is just eventually ending up in somebody's ocean somewhere. Is there any type of research as to how to do water management when it is periodic? I mean, how do we save what's creating the sedimentation? How do we save that water?
I mean, there's lots of discussions generally at a local, perhaps regional level about whether it's additional storage. I know there's discussions in the metro area about quarries as additional water supply and things like that in terms of capturing that excess water when we have it. And I certainly think that's going to be a part of the discussion moving forward and how we make sure that it's the same old, long worn out saying about the tool in the toolbox. I think that's part of it. And I think probably more so in terms of capture in storage of reservoirs in the northern part of the state. When you get down, where I live, it gets pretty flat, and that doesn't work nearly as well. I think the thing to also remember, and while I sort of made light of our rainfall because it is so erratic and it makes a big difference for our farmers, we still in fact get a pretty good bit of rain, and we have those groundwater resources, particularly in the southern part of the state, that help supplement that as well. So yes, I think storage is going to be part of the discussion moving forward. It's just likely going to be sort of highly regionalized.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Masters. We definitely have your contact information, and we'll be continuing to ask you for help and assistance. Thank you again for that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And to the committee, please, this is the time of the session when a lot of bills all of a sudden show up and we're all moving different places, but always check with our office and with the board out front. We will have meetings and such as that. We'll also reach out to you, but be on the lookout for that. We do have one meeting on Monday where we will be talking about some of our issues then. So just, it's a hearing, but pay attention to that. And we might have a call meeting, but this is a lot like spinning the wheel in poker. We don't know where all our committee members are because, not spinning the wheel in poker, excuse, roulette. So we don't know where our members are. We're all over the place. And so we will work hard to get our quorums to have our meetings. So it's important you let us know that. And having said that, we stand adjourned.